Okay, so mixing and effects. I listed here classic mixes and period mixes because I think it's really important to understand the difference. Classic mixes tend to be stand the test of time, where period mixes are more like new and modern and cool. You get the cool new effects and you get the wow factor. But 5 years from now, you're going to go, oh yeah, that was 2015, 2016, because effects and technology continues to change and will continue to change. Just like when I mixed in the 80s, we used to have these ultra harmonizer effects that we thought were the coolest things. We threw them all over guitar, all over vocals, and now I listen to it and I go, wow, that was really 80s sounding, because that effect just typifies the 80s. Kind of decide as you're going along what the music really requires, but you listen to things that were from, say, the Motown era or the Beatles, and you go, wow, those things kind of still hold up quite a bit because they didn't use any tricks. They just used regular reverb, regular stuff that was everyday garden variety kinds of effects that you'd hear today. So it sort of steps out of the way in the effects world, steps out of the way so that you can actually appreciate the music a little more rather than making the whole record about effects. That said, if your record really is all about effects, then go to town. See what I'm saying? But understanding that, I think, is important. We didn't understand that it was going to definitely have a period. It's going to make it sort of imprinted on a period when you use the newest, coolest effects from that time period. And effects in mixing, okay? Remember, nothing makes up for a bad performance. You can't put reverb on a vocal or a harmonizer to make it sound better. You can make it sound better, but you can't fix it. You can auto-tune vocals, right? So it's a corrective measure if somebody didn't sing great. But a great singer is still a great singer. And whether they're in pitch or not is a lot less important than if it's a great performance. So don't settle for bad performances. You can try to hide them with effects, but in my opinion, it just sort of makes your mix sound a little less secure in itself. Sometimes it's okay to say, okay, not the greatest singer, but a really great song, so we're not going to try to cover that up. We're going to make this be exactly what it is. Because when you try to hide these little things, sometimes it makes the listener feel like something's wrong that you're really trying to hide and pull the wool over their eyes. So, you know, the old saying, oh, we'll fix it in the mix. That was the typical joke that we had in the studio for years. It's like, oh, just leave it. We'll fix it later. We'll fix it later. We'll fix it in the mix. Then after the mix is done, oh, we'll fix it in mastering. Don't worry, we'll fix it in mastering. Pretty soon it's like on the shelves, and you can't fix it anymore. The fact is that the best time to fix things is when you're recording them, and make it be what you want it to be. And if it's not what you want it to be, erase it. Start over. It's not a big deal. Nothing is so precious that you can't do it again. When to start mixing is really important. As I said last time, I like to start mixing the first time I record something. So I try to make it sound more like a record at every stage. And I always start with gain structure. Getting the gain structure correct is very important to not having any distortion in your recordings. And a lot of people sort of overlook this. The way that you can really correct, or at least start at a good level so that you have the proper gain structure, is start with the kick drum at a 0 level and then build everything around that. And if you do that, then the other foundational elements will be quieter or louder, but generally speaking, your kick drum's going to set it so that you're not going over 0. Or you can even be a little more conservative and bring the kick drum down to -3 and then build a mix around that level. But try not to move the kick drum and build the mix around that. At least one element is going to be stable. It's going to keep the whole gain structure in perspective so you don't overload your master in terms of levels. So I start with the drums, build the foundational elements, other rhythm elements, melody elements, backing vocals, and finally lead vocals. My personal taste, which isn't set in stone for anybody, but I always try to have the energy and the rhythm balance left to right. So if it's a rhythm piano that's playing in the lower mid-range and a rhythm guitar that's in the upper mid-range, I'll pan the rhythm guitar to the right and the keyboard to the left. And I do believe that that comes from the simulated stereo mixes that I used to hear on from the Beatles in the early 60s, where they put band left and vocals right. It was just sort of the thing that I've heard my whole life in that kind of perspective. Energy and rhythm balance, maintain syncopation and instrument balance, really important as you're building this kind of a mix. let's talk briefly about music production. I wanted to get a little esoteric for a second and talk about the whole concept of production, music production, because I think everybody knows the basic idea of what music production is. But I don't think, maybe I can sort of stimulate your brain to think about it in a few different ways. For example, obviously music is not brain surgery. It really isn't nobody's gonna live or die if you create a bad production or a bad mix. So go for it and follow your instincts, and later if you don't like it, you can start over again. It's really that easy. I always try to be as true to the song as possible because music is about communicating to your audience. As sure as I'm communicating to you by speaking to you, the song is supposed to do the same thing. So that's primary. If you're not communicating to your audience, then you've missed the mark somewhere, even if you've got the greatest drum sound in the world. Because if they don't understand what the song is about and what you're trying to communicate with the song, then your audience is kind of missing the point of what the writer intended when they wrote the song. I try to keep it as simple, and too much information is very confusing to the listener. I used to work with young bands, and every idea that came up, whether it was the drummer came up with this cool new idea for a bridge, or the guitar player came up with this cool riff that we got to throw in somewhere because it's really cool, what happens is you get this hodgepodge of ideas sort of forced into a song, and 9 times out of 10 I'll say, that is a really cool guitar riff. Go write a new song. Take it away from this song. It's confusing everything. Generally speaking, you don't need tons of ideas in songs. It took me a long time to come to that conclusion when I used to be of the school of, throw the kitchen sink in and it'll be better. Until I realized the more elements, musical elements I added, what it was doing that made me feel good was it was filling up the sonic spectrum, but it wasn't really adding to the song. So the right arrangement is super important in terms of the production. But you don't need a ton of elements if they're all doing the right stuff. Consistent messages to connect to the listener, I think, is super important. The melody, the rhythm, the lyric, if consistent, can give a much more powerful message to the listener. For example, I was working on a song a few years ago, and it had this kind of cool dance beat, and it was really a cool kind of groove. The music was in minor, so it was kind of moody, and the song was all about partying all night. And I was like, but it sounds sad, but you're like saying something happy with the lyric. You're kind of giving a mixed message. So the music itself has a feeling to it, and that feeling has to correspond with what the lyric is trying to communicate and the melodies. So it's kind of like this. I'll give you a little example out of my own life. So when I'd work really late at the studio, when I was married, I used to come home 2 and 3 in the morning, and I'd come home, and my wife would be sitting at the kitchen table, and I go, what's wrong? And she'd go, nothing. I'm like, okay, I know something's wrong, but you're saying nothing. Okay, do I believe what you're saying or your body language? So she'd cross her arms, and she'd be like, nothing, everything's fine. It's 3 in the morning. I was like, okay. So that's what I mean about mixed messages. Songs can do the exact same thing. If you have melodies that don't match with the lyric, you have a sad melody with a happy lyric, or a happy lyric with a sad music. Production techniques. Obviously, song arrangement's important. Pre-production's really important. I used to take bands into studios, and we'd go into the rehearsal studio for pre-production, and I'd listen, I'd be like, something sounds really weird about this. And so I'd say to the vocalist, stop singing for a second. Guitar player, stop playing guitars. Keyboards, stop playing. Let me just hear bass and drums. So I would listen. I'm like, did you know he's playing a kick drum there? Bass player wasn't playing. He was out of sync with him. And the bass player would go, no, I never heard that before. I didn't know he was playing that pattern. So he was like in a rehearsal space. Everybody's playing so loud. He's getting enveloped in the music in his own little world, playing his part, thinking it's great, not knowing what the other guys were playing. So it's really important in pre-production, if you're working with an ensemble or a band, break it down to its elements and then add them back. As if you were sitting at your computer soloing things and bringing them in as you go, you can see how it builds and if there's any conflicts. Other than that, it's very difficult to pick out who's doing right and who's doing wrong. The bass player might have been having the right part that he was playing, and the drummer needed to alter his part. So it's all about making all of these pieces really work together. Lyric is super important. I always like to know from the writer in the band or the artist or whomever I'm working with where the song's coming from their perspective. Why did they write the song in the first place? What motivated them? Not like, oh, I just wanted to write a hit song. I want to know exactly what was the mood that made you think about writing this and what led you down the path of writing this song. Because then I can understand what the song is really about and not just my interpretation of it. And then I can try to further that mood when we create the music. Instrumentation, choice of what sonics you want to use, what types of instruments, whether you want to use classical instruments, acoustic instruments, electronic drums, real drums, you name it. From left to right, there's everything from electronica all the way to mandolins and banjos. Whatever you choose to do is great as long as it's also in coordination with the lyric and the melody. Because what do they say? A song is melody and lyric, right? Words and music. That's what they always print on top of the sheet music, words and music. Because that's really what it is. Words, it has to really marry with the melodies. Type of music. So that's what I was saying. The style, the orchestration, the band, whether it's keyboard oriented or guitar oriented, or what are the main sonic elements in the band. Most bands have a focal point of what the band is. Whether it's a keyboard-oriented band or a guitar-oriented band, I'd say Guns N' Roses would be a guitar-oriented band, where Journey, that's another question. Journey is probably more of a keyboard-oriented band, and most of the writing was done by the keyboard player. So whoever's doing the writing usually focuses around their instrument, but not always. So it's important to know who's going to take more center stage than the other elements. That kind of brings me around to the really important topic of sonic space. Every song has so much sonic space, and how you utilize it is up to you. Just like this room can only fit so many people, or like a canvas only has so much space, and how you paint it is up to you as the producer or producer engineer or both. So the first sound element that's recorded usually takes up a lot of the space because they have an open canvas. Nobody's there to tell them, oh, you can only play this much. Think of it as a painting. So it's a blank canvas, and the drummer can play, and he can do whatever he wants, and nobody's there to say, hey, you're overplaying. Or if the rhythm elements all play together, they kind of take up a certain piece of that canvas, and then everybody else has to find space around it. So it's really important. Overdub in the order of what you think is most important sonically, element-wise. Whatever sonic element is most important. Rhythm tracking, then overdubbing, melodies, backing vocals, lead vocals, mixing, and then mastering is the entire process. So the process of overdubbing also has sort of an order that I always like to look at. And if I can only get the guitar player on a certain day, but he's not a most important guy, and I can't get the keyboard player first, even though he's a more important kind of sound element, I do it anyway. But it's not a steadfast rule, but it really does work that whoever overdubs next always takes up as much space as they can because nobody's there to stop them, generally speaking. Unless you're working with really seasoned session players who understand this. So when I work with session guys, they generally try to not overplay. They try to the drummer will just be very simple until I tell them, no, you can loosen up and give me a little more. Because they want to come at it from the other perspective, because they know if they overplay and then I finish the record and the drummer is overplaying, I'm not going to call him on the next record. Right? That's a session player versus a band member. Okay? And band members usually come from a live performance perspective, which is different than recording arts. In a live situation, you can easily play a lot of stuff, and it's exciting because it's fun to watch, and it's just exciting in a live performance. But on a record, sometimes it's way too much. You also have to take into account that effects need sonic space. So if you want to hear a reverb, you actually have to have enough space so you can actually hear the reverb. If the canvas is so painted and so crowded, you won't be able to hear some of the nuances of what's going on.